Another dark elf. Just what Windhelm needs.
Damn Grayskin. Go back to Morrowind.
We don't have much love for your
Dark elves
kind.
live here and pollute our city with your ways of finding out what you really get all them dark elves. See why we live in
You should just
Any
move
excuse to
along.
This is our
despise us.
city. Ours!
That was supposed to be my moment. An audience with Ulfric. The one and only chance I would get to prove myself. You see, I was born in Skyrim, but my mother taught me traditional Dunmer recipes, things she remembered my grandmother making back in Morrowind. Despite a somewhat sheltered childhood, I loved learning about cuisine from all corners of Tamriel, and I knew, using that knowledge, I could become so much more than just a tavern cook. I thought my talent would be my ticket to the top. Maybe that could be the case in any other city, but this
Pollute our city with your ways of finding out what you really
is Windhelm.
First thing I did after waking up at Candlehearth Inn was go around Windhelm checking all the barrels for food. This will give me the salt and vegetables I'll need to get started. I'll have to balance cooking for myself and crafting a feast worthy of a Jarl. There's even more unowned barrels outside the walls, so I looted all of those, but none of the ones on the docks, since those belong to the trading companies. I saw this fishing spot, which reminds me, most of the fish meals are just grilled fish, so with the exception of the salmon fillet, slaughterfish steak, and clam chowder, I don't plan to cook much fish. Besides, Windhelm is on the water, the Jarl probably eats enough seafood as it is, and I don't think he would find a spread of grilled fish too impressive. After leaving the docks, I went back around to the upper district and picked all the flowers I could find. I was thinking there was a dish that required mountain flowers in the recipe, but what I was thinking of was the lavender dumplings, which, as the name suggests, use lavender. I did find some weapons on this grave and took them to sell. Morally questionable? Yes. Theft? Not according to Skyrim. I took this axe for chopping some wood later and checked containers around the market for anything I could take. I sold those weapons to the blacksmith and chopped some wood to sell to the innkeeper. As Ivan entered the inn, firewood weighing heavy on his arms, Elda barely hid her disapproval.
Another dark elf. Just what Windhelm needs.
She spat. No concern for whether or not Ivan could hear her. Ivan didn't let the reaction dissuade him.
I'm a paying resident. Surely, so long as I continue to pay my bill every night, she'll soon see my worth.
But as he presented the firewood with outstretched arms, Elda turned up her nose and refused to look at him. Just as he opened his mouth to ask if she'd like to buy some, the door behind him opened and Nils approached, with an armful of wood himself. "Over there in the kitchen, Nils. I'll have your fee ready at the counter," Elda said cheerfully. She then turned to Ivan, who still held out his offering. "First come, first serve, elf."
I was here first.
Ivan started to protest before catching himself, taking a deep breath and starting over.
Of course, Sarah. I'll just have to be earlier next time.
He gave a respectful bow of the head and set his firewood outside. I asked the innkeeper if there were any jobs available for me, and got some bounties and an anniversary edition quest. I then went over to the cooking station and started making some simple meals, also checking what kind of ingredients I would need in the future to make the more complex meals. Before the stores closed, I went to the White File and mixed some potions with those mountain flowers I picked. Nothing I made sold for very much, but at least it's something. I also wanted to check out the market some more, and this Nord woman gave me my very first quest. It was pretty simple: deliver something to the court wizard. I hoped doing quests for the Nords would put me in their good graces.
I'd seen another Dunmer running a stall in the market, and I thought he might have some advice on gaining the Nord's respect. Unfortunately, he read me the same riot act as the rest of my brothers. Don't rely on the Nords, they'll never respect us. That Altmer woman just to stall over seemed to have the Nord's respect, or at least their indifference. I thought she had the right idea. If I could just prove my usefulness to the Nords, they would have no choice but to acknowledge me as their equal.
I headed up to the palace to deliver that nightshade extract to the court wizard. He gave me a whopping 250 gold for my trouble. After finishing my quest, I headed into the Grey Quarter to learn a little bit more about the treatment of the Dark Elves in the city. Ambery made it sound pretty bleak, speaking fondly of Morrowind as he thought back on it. The other patrons of the Corner Club seemed nice enough as well. I even saw Nirene again. See, she doesn't look down on the Dark Elves. She's here in the Grey Quarter, hanging out with them. She seems fine. Malthair also reminisced about Morrowind and his desire to return to the ancestral homeland. Is Windhelm really so inhospitable that everyone wants to return to an ashen wasteland? It can't be that bad, right? As I left the Corner Club, I gave this homeless Nord some money just to be kind. Hopefully word travels amongst the other Nords. I went back to the inn and made light conversation with some of the Nords, hoping to make a good impression. I paid for my room,
maybe you should just move along.
Despite this lovely little remark, and found this morning guy in there, so I gave him some ale I had in my pocket before going to bed. The next day I downed some of the food I'd made, and saw the drunk guy was still in my room partying.
My favorite drinking buddy. Let's get some meat.
Hey, at least one of the Nords likes me. Only like 19 more to go. I took some of the free things at the inn, mostly gold, and left to start my first day of hard work. I know one of the pastries I need to make uses snowberries, so I picked a bunch of those while I checked out the land outside of the walls. The farms grow mostly wheat and eggs, which is perfect for an aspiring chef. I found a couple iron ore veins outside the walls, and there's a smelter in town, so I can make ingots for some extra money. I picked wheat to sell back to the farmers, but they don't buy the eggs or snowberries. Oh well, more for me to cook with. I met this goat who taught me all about his people, apparently, and caught some fish swimming near the surface of the river. I found some more ore veins and remembered that Kynes Grove is nearby, but I don't think I'll ever end up traveling that far, honestly. This farmer was fighting some wolves, so I waited until he finished and collected the spoils. I crossed the river to see what was alongside the walls, but it really wasn't much. Definitely nothing worth getting frostbite over. I tried talking to some Argonians on the dock, but they seemed to hate dark elves too, and here I thought they'd be sympathetic since the Nords treat them pretty poorly as well. Since the warehouses are all open, I went inside to see if there were any quests to be had. All I found was someone asking me to steal a ledger, so I ignored it. Back inside the walls, I checked out what I need to make some of the pastries. I thought the eggs and flour I had would be enough, but it turns out I need a lot of butter and milk for these recipes. Food vendors sell both, but rarely enough and usually not in a great quantity, so those might be tough to get my hands on. A couple things also require moon sugar, which I should be able to get whenever the Khajiit caravan comes through town. I stopped by the general trader in the Grey Quarter to see what he had for sale and to sell some of my things I'd found on my walk. I smelted my iron into bars, sold them to the blacksmith, and I forgot there was a meat stall in town, but I'm glad there is because I can get meat for my dishes that way. After giving a beggar woman some gold, Ivan struck up a conversation with a sympathetic Nord. He said Skyrim should be for all types of people, to which Ivan agreed, but emphasized that he didn't mind working for the privilege. Brunwulf told him he was being a fool for trying to suck up to Ulfric and those close-minded Nords. From what Brunwulf said, it sounded like anyone who wasn't a Nord got treated with the same disrespect Ivan had faced.
Even the Argonians working on the docks? But they've worked for their stay. They've proven themselves useful.
Brunwulf simply shook his head. Naive boy. One day, after you've done enough to earn their respect 10 times over, and the Nords still find a reason to deny you, you'll understand. Ivan had a sour mood for the rest of the day. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Why would Brunwulf encourage him to stop trying to prove himself?
He must be jealous.
Ivan reasoned.
Because he's old and worn, while I'm still young and willing to work, and work hard to earn my place.
I went to visit the palace and the palace chef to see if he could sell me any ingredients, or perhaps train me in the art of cookery, but he had nothing to say to me. Typical. I checked out what the court wizard had for sale before I left, and it wasn't anything I needed or could afford. To make sure I didn't accidentally eat the food I'm making for Ulfric, I have this little container in my room that NPCs can't loot, so I put the food I'd already made in there. It seems the food in the kitchen is free to patrons, so I took some garlic for my recipes. I really wanted to make some of the fancy things like crab bisque, so I'll have to go out and kill some mud crabs later. I stored away what I had made, and a couple of barrels around town had replenished themselves. That didn't take as long as I had expected. I stopped by the Temple of Talos to see what all the fuss was about. Wow, big snake. Anyway, down by the docks I spoke to another dark elf who just told me the same thing as everyone else. Nords suck. I decided it was getting pretty late and headed back to the inn for the night. I woke up bright and early the next morning and headed outside the town to see if I could find any mud crabs for the crab bisque. I checked over all the plants and picked some that I missed last time. Geez, it sure is cold out here, huh? I eventually found myself at a mill up the river. I talked to the owner who said she'd buy firewood off me, but this is a pretty long way to go just to sell wood. Plus, it is freezing out here. I realized I was getting too cold and tried to go inside one of the buildings, but they were all locked. The colder I got, the slower I ran, and I really didn't think I was going to make it back to Windhelm before I froze to death. Thankfully, these braziers outside were enough to warm me up and prevent me from dying. Skyrim winters are unforgiving, and dark elves really aren't built to withstand this level of cold. After warming up enough, I retreated back into the safety of the walls. I found some iron on that trip, so I made a few ingots to sell before buying the ingredients I needed at the inn. They mostly sell pre-cooked food, so I just bought some salt and butter, which I was happy to see. With that butter, I was finally able to make some pastries at the oven. I made an apple pie and a snowberry crostata. Some of the barrels at the docks had refilled as well, so I looted those. After nearly freezing to death, I figured it would be a good idea to buy some warmer clothing, so I went to the shops. I bought some braziers braziers and a hat to keep myself warm. I also stopped by the corner club and bought their stock of butter and salt. Since I was having good luck at the vendors, I went around town to check everyone's stock and found a good number of ingredients that I would need later. Outside the walls again, I thought I might go looking for a mud crab or clams, but saw this wolf and got scared, so I ran and hid, and decided to try again later when I was better equipped to handle a fight. I went inside to do what I do best, cook some food, and found that the innkeeper was selling exactly 1 jug of milk, so I bought it and used it to make a sweet roll. I went back out to the other side of the river to look for clams again, and this time just found a bunch of wolves and barnacles. I did my best to dodge around them, and eventually came upon some mud crabs. Luckily, they both gave me crab meat so I could make the crab bisque and the crab cakes. I kept going, still hoping for clams, but retreated when I saw more wolves. Plus, it was getting pretty dark, and I didn't want to wade into cold water at night and risk freezing to death. I warmed up inside the walls and ate some food before going back to the inn and using the crab to make the crab bisque, crab cakes, and crab legs. Honestly, it was a pretty great outing. I put all my food away and left the inn to make one last trip to the market. I have no idea why the lady running the produce stand isn't selling fresh produce, but she was my last hope of finding leeks. They haven't been spawning in barrels this run, and I'm not sure if they usually do. After that, I went to the Hall of the Dead. I don't remember why, and I don't know what I was looking for with such vigilance, so don't ask. Finally, I returned to the inn and went to bed. The next morning, I went back to the market because I remembered that I had delivered the nightshade for the lady running the produce stand and wondered if the things at her stall would now be free. I wish I had checked earlier because yes. Well, the cheaper things anyway. I went ahead and snagged the leeks, running back to the inn to use them in my cooking. I made cabbage potato soup, vegetable soup, tomato soup, and a chicken dumpling. Afterward, I ran over to the alchemist to buy some berries for my crostadas and sell off the things I had harvested. I didn't have any butter to make crostadas just yet, so I decided to do some ingredient gathering. Before I left town, I went back to the inn to see if I could hire a mercenary for some protection outside the walls, but being a Nord, he wouldn't even consider working for a dark elf. Typical. I was happy to see the Khajiit caravan was in town, and I stopped by to get some moon sugar for the elsewhere fondue. I didn't end up getting a backpack, but that would have been a good idea. Instead, I ran up the river to the mill because I knew there would be some mud crabs up there, and needed 1 more crab meat for the creamy crab bisque. I killed the mud crabs, got my crab meat, and caught a salmon migrating up the waterfall. I saw a chest under this waterfall and decided to risk the icy waters to see what was in it. I got an amethyst from the lockbox, and a couple of expensive finds from the chest. Happy with my haul, I headed back to Windhelm. This guy gave me some mead, which was nice of him, and I warmed up by the braziers before walking over to the farms. I really should have gone into town and sold the things I found, but I did not. Rather, I continued on and accidentally aggroed this wolf. He chased me back to one of the farms and... What is happening? Why? Once all that was over, I looted all the animals and didn't realize it would count as stealing, so I had to reload. All the way back to the waterfall. Shit. This is why I should have stopped into town first. That way I could offload some of my finds, and I would have an autosave to reload. Oh well, that's part of the challenge. I made my way back to the same spot, forgetting to stop into town again, why am I like this, and this time the farmer attacked the right animal. I got all the goodies and went clam hunting again. I found a brazier by this ruin, so I had a spot to stop and warm myself up, which was very useful. On one of the little islands, I ended up with a wolf chasing me. Maik the liar was nearby, so I braved the freezing water to run over, hoping that he would kill the wolf for me, but it turns out he's a big coward. Eventually, with my only options being death by wolf or death by freezing, I made the decision to defend myself. It was a hard choice. Originally, I only planned to kill for meat for my cooking, but I really didn't want to reload my save all the way back at the mill again. I killed the wolves chasing me. Luckily, none of them were ice wolves because those are way too strong. To warm up after my icy plunge, I ran back over to that ruin and stood by the brazier for a while. Once I was thoroughly warm, I made the stupid choice to continue looking for clams. In the dark and cold, I then searched for the evasive final ingredient he needed. Just 1 clam and his feast would be complete, ready for Ulfric to taste and judge. He had no doubt in his mind that the Jarl would love every bite. All he needed was 1 measly clam. Suddenly, as he knelt on the shore, Ivan heard snarling behind him. He whipped around to see an ice wolf and a horker battling for territory. He froze, hoping the animals hadn't seen him. But as the blubbering beast collapsed with a dying grunt, the victor turned its attention to Ivan. In a panic, open ocean to one side, certain death to the other, Ivan closed his eyes and dove into the freezing waters. Adrenaline overrode the shock in his muscles, and he swam faster than he ever had to the near shore. In the distance, smoke rose from a stranded ship.
Respite
was the only thought he could form. Ivan could feel his consciousness slipping as the cold water seeped through his clothing and into his skin. Just as his vision began to speckle with black blobs, he felt land beneath his feet. Ivan clawed his way onto shore, tripping on large stones and charging past an unaware Horker. As he approached the sunken ship, Ivan could hear voices. The closer he got, the clearer the voices became. They were gruff, raspy yells, taunting each other and laughing raucously. Ivan peered around the towering ice to find the boat overrun with bandits. And on the main deck, a warm, welcoming fire, complete with a bedroll and a fresh-cooked meal. His survival instincts kicked in, and without a second thought, Ivan boarded the lower deck of the ship. He needed to get to the fire and out of his rapidly freezing clothes, or it would be the end of him.
All that ran through my mind was, Divines, what have I done? I barely remember what happened that night. I just remember waking up wearing fur armour. I must have taken it from one of the bodies to stay warm. I don't know how I slept. I was still in shock the next morning, and to say I was exhausted would be an understatement. My legs and arms ached. My skin burned when touched. It was the most pain I've ever felt. 2 hours it took me to walk back to Windhelm, and you know what I found when I stepped off that wretched boat? Clams.
I walked back over encumbered, and when I got inside the walls, I just went to bed. 13 hours later, I woke up famished and still weighed down. I ate some food before taking off for the market to unload my things I had gotten on the trip. Ivan didn't want any reminders. I had some ores for my journey, so I made them into ingots and sold them, along with the bandits' weapons and armor. I bought some ingredients at the market and sold off some of my loot. I got this expensive staff from one of the chests at the wrecked ship, so I went up to the court wizard hoping he could give me a good deal. 534 gold is pretty damn good. After making the rounds to all the vendors and buying all their milk and butter, this courier stopped me and gave me an inheritance letter. I have no idea who died while I was gone. Finally, after all the time and trauma, I made that blasted clam chowder. I can confidently say it was not worth it. I finished cooking up the last few meals I wanted to make for the Jarl, and went up to Ulfric's palace to present the feast.
So I demanded an audience with the Jarl. I'm not sure why they allowed it. I thought maybe it was my confidence, but I'm starting to suspect the guards just wanted to see Ulfric put me in my place. I guess I gave them what they wanted. The whole ordeal was humiliating. My recipes were called exotic slop, and they said the smell was sickening. I was even accused of being a Thalmor spy sent to poison Jarl Ulfric. I'm scared to even look at one of the city guards the wrong way, for fear they'll consider that reason enough to detain me.
Ivan sat in silence and began to understand what everyone had been telling him. If he stayed in Windhelm, this would be his life. Nords refusing to work for or even with him. He'd be in constant competition with his elven siblings and forced to fend for himself, all while being pelted with insults and worse.
I think it took a few days for everything to set in. I felt numb at first, the realization that I've been vying for the approval of these... I shouldn't stoop to name-calling. After having had time to come to terms with it all, I've made my decision. I need to leave Windhelm and learn my people's history. I need to see Solstheim.
Uh-huh. Well, the fee is 3,000 gold.
3,000 septims?
I only had about 1,500 gold, so it was time to start grabbing some more quests. Up until now, I hadn't done any quests for the Dark Elves because of Ivan's belief in doing your own hard work. But I went to the general store in the Grey Quarter and took that quest to return Viola's ring. It's not stealing if I'm putting it back. After accepting the quest, I went down to the dock to see if I could help any of the Argonians. I could have sworn one of them asked me to beat up one of their bosses, but I couldn't get that quest this time. I did find a woman wanting me to get back her stolen necklace, but it was pretty far out of town, so I decided to skip it unless I couldn't get any money otherwise. I went back inside the city and returned Viola's ring, letting Ravine know right after. He gave me a whopping 600 gold. While I was at the inn asking around for work, this guy decided he wanted a beatdown, so I happily gave it to him. I got my 200 gold and an incredible sense of satisfaction. I took a quest to wipe out some bandits, but the cave was too far from the city for me to risk it. Instead, I invested in a nicer weapon and made my way to an old ruined house on the edge of town, where it was rumored a bandit leader was hoarding a very expensive ring. I bet that alone would pay for the boat ride and leave me with some coin to get myself established in Raven Rock. It took so long to kill these guys, and this archer had a seemingly endless supply of explosive arrows. Finally, I managed to take them all out, but not before dying a couple of times. I looted all the dead bandits, getting some nice armor to wear or sell, and a nice pair of frost-resistant boots. I wish I had had those earlier in the run, but they're still nice to have now. Unfortunately, it was too much loot for this loot goblin to carry, so I had to drop some. I found this ring on the dead guy inside, and snatched it to sell at some point. As Ivan grabbed anything valuable looking, he caught a glimpse of a ruined tower near the edge of the hold, leading into the mountains. Thinking he might find some more valuable loot, he set off towards the tower. Though the walls had long since crumbled, a flag with traditional Dunmer tapestry stood proud next to the road, a plinth at the base. Ivan approached to find a book sitting atop it. Refugees Rest, Decree of Monument, the cover read. Ivan flipped through the pages of the journal, taking in the history of the monument. His grandparents likely entered Skyrim through this very checkpoint during the aftermath of the Red Year. We, the Jarls of Skyrim, hereby decree this site as a monument of the struggle of those who fled their native home of Morrowind in the time following the Red Year. There was so much Ivan didn't know. His grandparents refused to speak about the Red Year, and his mother was too young to remember any of the details of their escape, only ever saying that it was the most fear she had ever felt. Ivan knelt beside one of the many graves littering the ruin, mourning the connection he could have had to his ancestors. After a moment to process, Ivan began scouring the tower for more information. In a chest on the precarious second story, he found a set of traditional Dunmer clothes.
I think it's high time I started showing some pride in who I am.
I still ended up over encumbered, so I had to walk back to town super slowly. I went straight to the market to sell what I had looted, deciding to prioritize warmth over armor rating. I waited inside the inn for the Khajiit caravan to come through town, since it seemed the ring I was holding was of Khajiit origin, and I figured it might be important to them. Once the caravan had come back around, I was able to trade the ring for a set of Daedric armor. Solstheim is pretty inhospitable, so I'll be keeping the armor for my own protection. I sold off my fur armor and some other goodies, and that brought me all the way up to 3,200 gold, enough for the boat ride and enough to get myself settled in Solstheim. I waved goodbye to Windhelm one last time before talking to the boat captain and starting my new life in Raven Rock.
It stings when you feel like you don't belong. We're all just people, and belonging is all any person wants. I hope to find a place in my ancestral homeland. Not just a place where I can be, but a place where I can grow, thrive, where I can become more. This is it, the true home of my people. Wow. It's awful.
Thank you all for watching, and thank you so much for 10,000 subscribers. That is an insane number. I think that's more than the population of the town I went to high school in. I would especially like to thank my Patreon members, L. McManus, Spencer L., Sang County, Telly63, and Stupid Chud. Thank you for supporting me over on Patreon. I have a Patreon now. If you feel like supporting me, please go check it out. Link is in the description. It's pinned at the top of the comments and right here on screen. A huge shout out to my dad for once again voicing the lead. He was really flattered by everyone's comments on the Falkreath video, so thank you for those. And one last thank you for making this year so amazing. If it weren't for all of you guys making the Whiterun video kind of viral, I wouldn't be able to keep making these for nearly a whole year. I am so incredibly grateful, and I'm excited to make more this year. Have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next video.